The wind moved like a whisper across the bone-dry earth, carrying the scent of sagebrush and the sound of a small voice that would change everything. It was early yet in Dry Creek Hollow. The sky had just begun to shrug off its velvet sleep, painting itself pale gold over the spine of the red hills that loomed beyond town. The dirt roads had not yet warmed, and the air still carried the bite of night. In that hush before the clatter of wagons and morning gossip, Silas Merriweather made his rounds with the same quiet resignation he carried every day since the war ended, and the world had gone quieter around him. Boot heels tapped soft against the warped boards of the sidewalk, his shadow long and lean behind him. He cradled a dented tin cup of coffee, its steam ghosting upward into the crisp spring morning. The post office hadn't yet opened. The bell above the saloon door hadn't rung, and the wind moved like a whisper across the bone-dry earth. And then, it happened. A voice no louder than the wind itself rose from behind the orphanage fence. A child's voice, thin and hesitant, but carrying something that froze Silas where he stood. "Sir, could you pretend to be my daddy, just for one day?" He turned slowly, the warmth draining from his coffee as the words settled in his chest like gravel. The fence was rough-hewn pine, faded gray by weather and time. Between two slats, a pair of blue eyes blinked up at him, impossibly wide and still. He hadn't heard a voice like that since Virginia, since a boy too young to die had asked him, with blood bubbling at his lips, if someone would remember him, even if just for one day. Silas had nodded then, not trusting himself to speak. He'd buried that moment deep. Until now, the child's fingers curled through the fence like petals gripping thorns. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, though her gaze held something older, something weathered. He took a slow breath, unsure why the request struck him so deep. "I beg your pardon, little miss." His voice came out rough, the desert chewing at the ends of his words. The girl didn't flinch. "Could you be my daddy? Just for today?" His hand hovered at the rim of his coffee cup, stilled halfway to his lips. He had faced rustlers and drunkards, had chased thieves through cactus flats, and seen enough death to bury any softness a man might once have had. But this request, this child, it pinned him like a rifle shot. She shifted slightly, peering through the fence like a prisoner, longing for sunlight. "Today's when families come," she said, barely above a whisper. "They come to see if any of us are worth taking. Matron Pike says we're to be on our best behavior." Behind her, he saw the orphanage, a 2-story structure leaning into the wind, its paint peeling like old skin. Children flitted like birds from one chore to the next. Laundry on a line flapped like ghostly flags. He cleared his throat, the silence hanging heavy. "And what's your name?" "Little Miss. Clara May," she said. "Clara May Dillard. But the other children just call me Quiet." She paused. "I've been here longer than any of them. I think—" Silas crouched, lowering himself to meet her at eye level. The wood of the fence pressed against his knee. "Why me?" he asked, honest. "Because you walk past here every morning like you ain't afraid of nothing. You don't holler or laugh too loud like some men do. You just walk quiet." He studied her face, pale, serious, with 2 tight braids trailing like rope down her back. Her dress was clean but patched, her shoes a size too big, but it was the steadiness in her eyes that undid him. She wasn't asking out of whim or fancy. She was asking because she needed something to hold on to. "They always ask us about our families," she continued, eyes dropping to the dust. "But I ain't got none. My folks drowned when their wagon tipped. I don't remember him. Mrs. Pike says I was just a baby. Her voice thinned. If I had a papa, even pretend, maybe somebody might want me. Silas exhaled slowly. Something in his chest, a place he'd kept tightly locked since the war, gave a soft, unexpected crack. He looked down at his hand, rough, scarred, calloused, and imagined it holding hers. Well now, he said softly, we'd better go ask Matron Pike, hadn't we? Can't have the law breaking rules before breakfast. Clara May smiled. It wasn't wide or bright, it was cautious, but it was real. She released the fence and turned, her small frame darting toward the orphanage door like a fawn. Silas followed, his spurs jingling with each step, the tin of coffee forgotten on the fence post. The porch sagged under their combined weight. Inside, the scent of baking bread and apple slices warmed the air. Somewhere, a baby cried and was quickly soothed. Silas noted the effort, the swept floor, wildflowers in jars, the faint shine on worn doorknobs. Poverty clung to the place, but pride kept it standing. Matron Theodosia Pike met them in the kitchen. She was sturdy as a tree stump, with a face that had seen too many winters and hands shaped by hard work. Her hair was pinned tight beneath a lace cap, her eyes sharp behind round spectacles. Matron Pike, Clara said, tugging gently at her apron. This is Marshal Merriweather. He said he might be my papa just for today. Theodosia looked from child to lawman and back again. Silas felt a flicker of embarrassment rise behind his badge. Is that so? She said at last, removing her spectacles and folding them in her apron. Marshal Merriweather, may I speak with you? He nodded, following her into a small office cluttered with papers, ledgers, and a ticking clock. I won't scold you, she said, closing the door gently, but I must ask what you intend. Silas set his hat on the corner of the desk. To be honest, ma'am, I didn't intend nothin', but she asked, and I couldn't find the heart to say no. Theodosia's eyes softened. Clara's been passed over too many times. It chips away at them, each time someone leaves without them. She's a child, Marshall, but she carries disappointment like a grown woman. I won't make her promises, Silas said, but I can keep her company, just for today. Theodosia nodded slowly. Then make it a good one. It might be the only memory she has of being chosen. When they stepped back into the kitchen, Clara was helping another girl arrange cookies on a platter. She looked up, that cautious smile blooming once more. Is it all right? She asked quietly. Theodosia looked at Silas. He nodded once. Yes, dear, she said, but remember it's just for today. Clara nodded, but her eyes said otherwise. The rest of the morning moved like wind through tall grass. Silas found himself seated on the parlor settee beside Clara as families began to arrive. The room had been polished to its best doilies, lemon tea, and nervous children standing in neat rows. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. Clara sat close, her hand resting lightly on his knee, and when someone asked if she had family, she answered without hesitation. Yes, sir, this is my papa. The lie settled heavy in Silas's chest. He should have corrected it. He didn't, and as the light shifted and families came and went, he saw the way Clara watched each wagon that rolled in hope, flickering, then dimming. He felt something shift again in him, a promise forming not in words, but in the stillness between them. He had agreed to pretend, but some things, he was beginning to realize, didn't feel like pretending at all. Come on, Clara whispered. We have to ask Matron Pike for permission, but if she says yes, You'll be my papa for today." By 10 o'clock, the first wagon rolled in from the east, its wheels groaning like the bones of old men. And with it came hope Clara May had no business still holding. The wind had begun to pick up over Dry Creek Hollow, whistling through the gaps in shuttered windows and stirring dust devils that chased each other down the hard-packed main street. From the orphanage porch, Silas Merriweather could see the shimmering distance where the road curved in from the horizon. The morning was sharpening light brighter, air thinner, tension rising like heat off sun-baked tin. He stood just inside the threshold of the orphanage parlor, holding a cup of tea he hadn't touched. The walls were lined with clean linens and wildflowers stuffed into mason jars, the room scrubbed to its wooden bones. He could smell lemon oil on the floorboards and faint cinnamon from the cookies arranged on a doily-covered tray. It all looked too fine, too hopeful, like a church altar laid for a miracle. Clara May sat beside him, her back straight, her shoes tucked neatly beneath the hem of her patched dress. She'd brushed her braids until they shone like wheat in sunlight, and a single ribbon held them together at the ends. Her hands stayed folded in her lap, motionless except when her thumb moved in small circles over a crease in her skirt, a nervous habit, but the only one she allowed herself. Silas glanced down at her, and then back toward the dirt road, where that first wagon now rolled to a slow halt in front of the gate. The Millers. He had seen them once before, in town. Mr. Miller, stiff-shouldered and blunt-faced, the kind of man who measured a person by their handshake and the wear on their boots. His wife sat beside him in the wagon, her posture upright, her eyes already sweeping the property like an inspector sent from the governor's office. The couple stepped down. Mr. Miller's boots hit the earth with purpose. Mrs. Miller dusted off her skirts and adjusted her gloves as if she'd just arrived at a livestock auction. "They don't smile," Clara whispered. More observation than complaint. "Neither do I," Silas said. "But you don't need to," she replied. The Millers were ushered in by Matron Pike, who greeted them with the practiced cheer of someone who'd seen too many hopefuls become disappointments. The introductions were quick, formal, and just slightly too loud for the quiet the children had grown used to. "This is Marcus," Matron Pike said, presenting a sandy-haired boy of about 10. "He helps with the hens and can drive a nail straight." Mr. Miller appraised him like a fence post. "Can he read and write?" Mrs. Miller asked. "Better than most," Matron Pike said with polite confidence. They moved from child to child, asking pointed questions. Health, strength, chores, obedience. It wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. It was business. Silas watched Clara May's back straighten just a touch more each time they came closer. Her chin lifted, eyes wide with practiced hope. When the Millers finally stood before them, Mrs. Miller frowned almost immediately. "She's rather small for 7, isn't she?" she said. "I can carry 2 full buckets from the well," Clara said, voice soft but steady. "And I help with washing every Monday." "Admirable," Mr. Miller said, tone flat. "But we need someone who can handle field work, hauling hay, breaking ground, feeding swine. It's a tough life. There's no room for slackers." Silas's grip on his cup tightened, ceramic creaking. "She's got other qualities," he said before he could stop himself. "Smart as a whip, reads better than most adults I know, helps the little ones with their letters." Mr. Miller raised an eyebrow. "And you are?" "Silas Merriweather," he said, standing. "I'm Clara's." He paused, and Clara slipped her hand into his without looking up. "He's my papa," she said simply. The words hit him square in the chest. "Well, Mrs. Miller said, hesitating now. We were hoping for a child without complications. Silas set his cup down, gently, but firmly. What kind of complications? Mrs. Miller's gaze flicked to Clara, then back to Silas. Family interference. Mixed loyalties. We prefer a child who can devote themselves to our home. Clara's fingers squeezed his. It's all right, Papa, she said, her voice quiet but sure. They probably need someone bigger anyway. I understand. Silas swallowed hard, his throat dry. That's very understanding of you, sweetheart, he managed. The Millers moved on. Marcus was chosen. The boy looked pleased enough. Clara watched with a grace that broke Silas in places he didn't know he still had. The second wagon came in just as the Millers were signing papers. A younger couple this time, the Hendersons. Mr. Henderson seemed the sort who let his wife do the talking, which he did in a voice that trilled like a songbird and carried like a church bell. Oh, look at this one, she squealed, lifting the chin of a giggling 4-year-old named Melody. Isn't she just precious? Look at those curls. She's like a porcelain doll. Silas saw Clara's posture stiffen again. Mrs. Henderson flitted from child to child, fussing over clothes, eyes, dimples. She treated them like figurines on a shelf, not children with bruised hearts and early grief. When she reached Clara, she barely paused. She's too serious. She whispered to her husband, not quietly enough. I want a child who smiles more. Someone cheerful and bright. Clara didn't flinch. Silas leaned closer. Some folks don't know quality when they see it. She looked up and gave him a tiny smile, one meant for him alone. The Hendersons chose Melody. The girl twirled in delight. As they walked away with promises of ribbons and dresses, Silas wondered how long those smiles would last. The Washingtons arrived with the weight of age and the gentleness of loss. They were kind, but looking for help with a mother who wandered in mind and memory. They needed a child who could nurse, not laugh. They lingered with a girl named Hope, who had cared for her grandmother before her death. They left with her, and it felt right. Still, each goodbye was a notch on Clara's armor. She said nothing, but Silas could see the change the way her hands fidgeted just a bit more, the way her smiles came slower, took longer to fade. He wanted to say something, anything, but he'd never been good with words when they mattered most. When the room emptied again, and the silence returned, Clara finally spoke. I always think maybe this time will be different, she said, but I think I was made for waiting. He turned toward her. You weren't made for waiting. You were made for more than most folks know what to do with. She tilted her head. Do you really think so? I do. She nodded once, slowly, outside. The wind picked up again, lifting loose petals from the windowsills, scattering them across the room like confetti from some forgotten celebration. And then, from the road beyond the gate, another wagon rolled in, smaller, older, a single horse, 2 people, different. Everything about them felt different. They probably need someone bigger anyway, Clara whispered to him, her hand tightening around his. But thank you for saying I was smart. The 5th wagon didn't rattle or boast. It creaked in on soft wheels like it had nothing to prove, carrying 2 people who looked like they'd buried dreams and grown gentler because of it. From where Silas Merriweather stood near the edge of the orphanage porch, he could see the wagon's frame sag slightly beneath the weight of time. Its canvas was clean, but sun-faded, and the wheels turned with the tired grace of something long used, but well cared for. The horse pulling it was an older roan, sway-backed but steady. There was no urgency in its gait, only quiet persistence. Clara May watched them come with a different kind of stillness than before. It wasn't the tense hope she had offered the other families. It was something more uncertain, almost cautious, as though part of her didn't dare wish any more. Silas could feel the change in the air, too. The couple who stepped down from the wagon weren't dressed fine. There was no starch in their clothes, no gloss in their eyes. But there was something else, warmth beneath weariness, a softness earned through hardship. Bartholomew Stonecroft had the look of a man who had worked every inch of the land he owned, tall and thin, with hands that bore the calluses of honest labor. His eyes held a steady kindness that didn't blink away at first contact. His wife, Lillian, was rounder, shorter, with salt beginning to thread through her auburn hair and deep lines at the corners of her eyes from both laughter and sorrow. She moved with a careful grace, as though she still carried a weight that hadn't quite let go. They greeted Matron Pike without fuss, offering small nods instead of rehearsed smiles. When Matron began introducing the children, they didn't interrupt or interject. They listened. They crouched to speak to little Peter, who stammered through a story about a grasshopper he'd found in the garden. They admired Ruth's embroidery and asked Lucy if she liked to sing. They didn't talk over the children, and they didn't whisper to each other in judgment. When they reached Clara, Lillian knelt down before her, not with the eager energy of someone looking to be charmed, but with quiet interest, like one might examine a rare flower growing wild on a cliffside. "Hello, Howard, dear," she said gently. "What's your name?" "Clara May Dillard," the girl answered, sitting up a little straighter. "But most folks just call me Clara." "That's a beautiful name," Lillian replied. "Do you know what it means?" Clara shook her head, curiosity softening her features. "It comes from the Latin word clarus. It means clear or bright, like the way sunlight looks when it first comes through a window." Clara blinked slowly, absorbing it. "I didn't know that," she said. "Well, now you do, and I think it suits you." Lillian's eyes crinkled with warmth. Bartholomew remained a quiet presence at her side, offering a gentle nod that matched his wife's smile. Silas watched the moment unfold with a strange tightness in his chest. Something about the way the woman spoke to Clara, with no pity, no condescension, reminded him of his own mother, long buried in the cold Missouri dirt. She'd had that same tone, as if every word she spoke to a child added another stone to their foundation. "And who's this fine gentleman with you?" Bartholomew asked, glancing toward Silas with casual interest. Before Silas could speak, Clara answered. "This is Papa Silas," she said plainly. "He's my daddy." The words hit him like a hammer. Lillian's smile deepened. "Is that so? Well, you've got yourself a very fine papa." Silas swallowed hard, unsure whether to correct her, but Clara's hand was already resting lightly on his. He felt the fragile weight of it, and said nothing. Lillian continued her questions, asking Clara what her favorite color was sky blue, her favorite animal horses, even if I've never ridden one, and what she wanted to be when she grew up. "I'm not sure," Clara said, thinking hard. "Maybe a teacher. Miss Danner at the schoolhouse reads to us sometimes, or a nurse, like Mrs. Cooper from town. She always brings candy in her satchel." "Those are lovely dreams," Lillian said. "The world needs more people who want to help." Clara nodded slowly. "What do you and Mr. Stonecroft do?" she asked, the curiosity suddenly mutual. Bartholomew chuckled softly, his voice low and rough like boots over gravel. "We run a small ranch about an hour out, raise horses mostly, and a few cattle to keep us honest." "Do you have any children?" The question landed gently, but it lingered. Lillian's smile faltered. Just for a heartbeat. We did. A little boy named David. He got sick 3 winters ago. Pneumonia took him. I'm sorry, Clara said, solemn and still. Thank you, sweetheart, Lillian said, her voice now a little thinner. He would have liked you. He loved books and stories, too. Clara didn't look away. I don't remember my folks. They died when our wagon tipped into a creek. I was just a baby. Matron Pike says I held onto a tree branch until someone found me. She delivered the words like they were facts in a ledger. But Silas could feel the way she tightened beside him, how she held her breath between sentences. Bartholomew nodded slowly. That's a hard road. I don't have any stories about my family. Sometimes I make some up, just to feel like I belong. Lillian reached forward and placed a hand gently over Clara's. You belong. Clara May. Even without stories. They sat in silence for a few moments, just breathing in the quiet of the room. Later, after meeting a few more children and speaking briefly with Matron Pike, the Stonecrofts returned to the parlor. Clara and Silas still sat together on the worn sofa, hands intertwined. Lillian looked from one to the other, then knelt again before Clara. We've talked to a lot of children today, she said, and you've made quite an impression. Clara's hand found Silas's again, tighter now. Bartholomew stepped forward. We'd like to know how you'd feel about coming home with us. There's a school nearby, and we think you'd like the horses. One of them's named Buttercup. She's gentle as spring rain. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She looked up at Silas, hope warring with disbelief in her eyes. But what about Papa Silas, she asked. Would he come too? The question fell into the room like a stone in still water. Lillian blinked. I'm sorry, dear. Isn't Mr. Merriweather your father? Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. He's my pretend daddy. Just for today. I thought maybe, if I had a papa, someone might want me. The silence was heavier this time. Silas looked down at her. She wasn't crying, but her voice trembled just enough to make the truth inside her shake loose. He braced himself for disappointment in the Stonecrofts' eyes, for confusion, maybe anger, but instead, Lillian's eyes brimmed with tears. Oh, sweetheart, she whispered, reaching out to brush a hand against Clara's cheek. You thought we wanted you because you had a daddy with you. Clara nodded slowly. Lillian leaned in closer. We want you because you're you. Because when we asked what you wanted to be, you said a teacher or a nurse not for money, but to help people. Because when that little boy cried earlier, you sat beside him until he smiled again. Because you said you were sorry for our son, even though you never met him. Because you see people. Bartholomew stepped forward again, kneeling beside his wife. We don't need you to have a papa already, he said gently. We're hoping you might want us to be your mama and papa. Clara sat perfectly still. Then she turned to Silas. Papa Silas, she said quietly. What do you think I should do? He knelt so he could meet her eyes, just as he had done that morning at the fence. He couldn't say what he wanted. That wasn't the question. I think, he said, voice rough, that the Stonecrofts are good people, and I think they'd love you just the way you are. She nodded slowly, thoughtfully. I'd miss you. I'd miss you too, sweetheart. More than you know. She looked up at the Stonecrofts. Her voice came stronger now, steadier. Then I think I'd like to go home with you. She paused, then added, her voice trembling like a leaf. But only if Papa Silas says it's okay. We want you because of the way you see the world, Lillian said. And we'd be proud to have you. The sun dipped behind the Red Ridge Hills, casting gold over the hollow, and in that strange twilight, Clara May's small figure looked both braver and more breakable than ever. The last of the dust had settled around the orphanage, and the wagons belonging to other families had long since vanished into the wild horizon. Only one wagon remained in the yard, now a modest buckboard with high sides and a canvas bundle tied down in the back. The Stonecrofts were preparing to take Clara May home, and with them, something Silas Merriweather hadn't realized he wasn't ready to let go of. A breeze tugged at the hem of Clara's dress as she stood at the edge of the orphanage porch, her arms wrapped tightly around a small bundle of belongings. Tucked inside were her 2 dresses, the worn cloth doll Matron Pike had sewn by hand, a wooden horse carved by one of the older boys, and a thin book of prairie tales so used its pages had softened to the feel of linen. Behind her, Matron Pike stood by the door with a look somewhere between pride and grief. She'd seen dozens of children go over the years, some into good homes, others into hard ones. Clara had been there longer than any of them, and she wasn't the sort who made noise when she left a place. She'd always been quiet, careful like she was afraid of waking a memory that didn't belong to her. Lillian stood near the wagon, checking the straps on Clara's bundle. Bartholomew was at the front, reins looped in one hand, while he whispered to their old roan mare, whose ears twitched gently in the cooling air. Clara turned, eyes finding Silas standing just beyond the porch steps. She didn't move to him right away. Instead, she looked out over the town, the sagging rooftops, the crooked weather vane on the church steeple, the dusty post office, the tavern with its oil lamp flickering in the window. She seemed to be memorizing it, or maybe saying goodbye. When she finally stepped forward, her shoes tapped softly on the wood planks. She stopped in front of him, chin lifted just enough to keep her tears from spilling. "I said goodbye to Matron Pike," she said, "and to Peter and Lucy and Ruth. I gave Lucy my hair ribbon. She said she'd give it back if I ever came visiting." Silas nodded. "Sounds fair." Clara looked down at her bundle, then up again. "I don't have much to bring, but Lillian said I don't need much. Just myself." "She's right," he said, his voice low. "You've always been enough. Clara May." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her throat worked once. "I was scared this morning," she whispered, "that nobody would want me, that even if they did, I wouldn't feel it in my heart." He waited, not wanting to interrupt what was coming loose in her, but I felt it, she said. "When Lillian talked to me like I mattered, when Bartholomew listened without trying to fix anything, I felt it like sunlight inside." Silas didn't know how to answer that. His throat tightened in a way he hadn't felt in years. She stepped closer, voice even smaller now. "But I don't want you to forget me, even if it's only been one day." He crouched down in front of her, like he had on the other side of that fence, back when all this started. "Clara," he said, "I'm not likely to forget the only person who's ever asked me to be their papa." She smiled, a little crooked. "Will you come visit if Lillian and Bartholomew say yes?" "I will," he said, "if they'll have me." At that, Lillian looked up from the wagon and called across the yard. "You're welcome any time, Marshal Merriweather, and not just for Clara's sake." Bartholomew tipped his hat in agreement, and Silas felt something shift behind his ribs. Clara reached up, wrapping her arms around his neck. He felt her small body tremble, not quite crying, just holding tight. "Thank you for being my papa today," she whispered into his collar. "It was the best day of my whole life." He held her close, breathing in the scent of sunshine and pine soap and whatever else made up this little girl who had undone him so completely. "Thank you for letting me," he said, "even if it was just pretend." She pulled back enough to look at him, her blue eyes wide and serious. It didn't feel pretend. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came, so he just nodded. She turned and climbed into the wagon with Lillian's help, settling between them with her bundle on her lap and the shawl they'd given her wrapped around her shoulders, as the sun slid lower, casting long shadows across the yard. Bartholomew flicked the reins and the wagon began to move. Silas stood there, watching it roll slowly toward the road, the wheels creaking, the mare's hooves steady on the packed dirt. Then Clara leaned over the side, cupping her hand to call out softly, "Will you tell me stories next time?" Papa Silas. The kind real papas tell. He didn't trust his voice, not at first, but he raised a hand, nodded once, then found the strength to speak. "All the stories you want to hear," he promised, and then she was gone. The wagon turning the corner toward the trail that led out of town and into the hills beyond. The dust hung in the air behind them like breath on a cold morning, slow to fade. Silas didn't move for a long while. Matron Pike came out to stand beside him. She didn't speak either, just folded her hands and looked toward the horizon. When she did finally speak, her voice was soft, touched with the weight of years. "She'll be all right. I think she's better than all right," Silas said. "She's more than any of us knew how to see." He walked back down the porch steps alone. The yard felt emptier now, though the sun still warmed the ground. Inside the orphanage, laughter echoed faintly another child's story beginning. Maybe, but his day had ended. He went home to the back room of the jailhouse, his badge resting on the desk beside him, and his coffee gone cold on the windowsill. He thought of her then, riding toward something new, and wondered if he'd ever felt further from silence. "Will you tell me stories next time?" Papa Silas. The kind real papas tell all the stories you want to hear. He promised. 2 weeks later, a letter came with the morning stage, a child's handwriting crooked on the envelope, and inside, joy inked in blue ink. Silas Merriweather stood alone in front of the post office, the wind tugging at the hem of his duster and the brim of his hat tilted low to keep the sun from burning into his eyes. The mail sack had been thinner than usual, most of it circulars or bills for people long gone from Dry Creek Hollow. But at the very bottom, tucked between a rolled newspaper and a creased telegram, was an envelope with his name spelled slightly wrong, Silas Merriweather in pencil, with each letter pressed so hard the paper crinkled. He hadn't realized his fingers were shaking until he tried to open it. Inside, written on stationery that smelled faintly of lilac and wood smoke, were 2 pages filled with crooked lines and joyful loops, words crammed into the margins where she hadn't wanted the story to end. "Dear Papa Silas, I learned to collect eggs from the chicken coop without getting pecked. Mama Lillian showed me how to hold a hen right. Papa Bartholomew says Buttercup might let me ride her soon. The garden is growing green things, and the bees are fat and sleepy. I told them about how you saved Peter from falling in the well that one time, even if you said it wasn't a big deal. I also told them about the story you promised. You said you'd tell it when you visited. Are you coming soon? I miss you in a quiet way. Love always, Clara May." He folded the letter carefully, tucking it into the inside pocket of his vest like something precious. But as he did, something else unfolded in him, a longing too old to name, too new to ignore. Later that evening, after his last patrol and a bowl of beans that tasted more like memory than food. He walked to the livery and borrowed a horse. Rosie, a bay mare with soft eyes and a gait easy on the bones, didn't need to be told twice when he turned her toward the West Trail. The ride to the Stonecroft Ranch took him through hills still green from the spring thaw. Cottonwoods trembled at the edge of streams, and meadowlarks sang like they remembered better days. The land opened up just past Widow's Notch, revealing a small white house tucked between grazing fields and distant scrub hills, smoke curling steady from the chimney. As he dismounted, Clara came running down the porch steps like she'd known the exact minute he'd arrive. "Papa Silas," she called, her arms already reaching. He caught her with a grunt, lifting her off the ground for a second and breathing in the scent of wind and lilac that clung to her. She was heavier now, not much, but enough to notice. And stronger, too. "I told them you'd come," she said, smiling so wide it nearly cracked her face. "I told them wild horses couldn't keep you away." She dragged him toward the porch where Lillian was drying her hands on her apron, cheeks flushed with warmth. "We're so glad you came." "Marshall Merriweather," she said. "Or should I say Silas, since you're family now." "Silas is fine," he said, removing his hat. Bartholomew stepped around the side of the house, a bundle of hay under one arm and dust on his boots. "You're just in time," he said. "Clara's been practicing on Buttercup. We were going to let her try a slow ride today. She told me in the letter." Silas replied, smiling. "That mare's gentler than some men I know." The next hour passed like water over stone, steady, quiet, and full of good things. Clara showed him the vegetable patch she'd helped plant. She introduced him to every chicken by name and insisted he try one of Lillian's biscuits, which, she said with full seriousness, were the best in all Arizona territory. Later, in the barn, Buttercup stood patiently while Clara fitted the blanket and adjusted the saddle. Silas watched from the stall gate as Bartholomew gave her a leg up, guiding her into the saddle like she was royalty. She sat straight, reins in both hands, lips pressed together in focus. Bartholomew walked beside her for the first round, giving instructions in a voice that was both gentle and firm. Then he stepped back and let the mare circle the corral on her own. Clara's face lit up like a match catching flame. "I'm doing it," she cried. "Papa Silas. Look, I see you, sweetheart." He called. "You look like you were born to it." She rode 3 full laps before easing the mare to a stop. When she dismounted, breathless and beaming, she ran straight into Silas's arms. "Did you see me?" "I saw everything." She leaned into him for just a second before pulling away to help brush down Buttercup's coat. The mare nickered, as if pleased with her pupil. After supper, they sat on the porch together, Clara, Silas, and the Stonecrofts passing a plate of cookies and glasses of sweet tea between them. The sun dipped low, and fireflies began to flicker in the tall grass near the fence line. It was the kind of evening that didn't need much talking, the kind that simply let people breathe together. Then Lillian cleared her throat and exchanged a glance with Bartholomew. "Silas," she said, "we've been meaning to talk with you about something." He looked up, not surprised, but curious. "It's about Clara," Bartholomew said. "About the future." "I figured," Silas said, setting his glass down. "We were talking," Lillian continued, "about how much she loves you, and how you clearly feel the same. It's not every man who would spend a day pretending to be someone's father, just to give her a chance at happiness." Silas said nothing, but his jaw shifted slightly. "We want to ask you something," she went on. "Something permanent." His chest tightened. "Would you be willing to become her godfather?" she asked. "Legally, officially, with all the rights and responsibilities that come with it." Silas blinked. What?" Bartholomew leaned forward. "If something were to happen to us, we'd want Clara to be with someone who loves her already, someone who sees her the way we do. And we can't think of anyone more fitting than the man she chose first." Clara had gone quiet, her eyes wide, lips slightly parted. "You want me to be her?" "Her godfather," Lillian said again. "Family, not just a visitor." Silas turned to Clara. "What do you think about that, sweetheart?" She didn't answer right away. Then, like sunlight pushing through cloud, her smile broke free. "That would mean you're mine forever, wouldn't it? Not just pretend." He nodded, his voice thick. That's exactly what it would mean. She jumped up from her chair with a whoop, wrapping her arms around him so fast he nearly dropped his glass. Yes, I want Papa Silas to be my godfather." Lillian laughed softly. "Well, I suppose that settles it, doesn't it?" They all sat back, the moment warm and full and right. Silas didn't say much after that. He didn't need to. He watched Clara chase fireflies along the fence line, her laughter carrying across the field. And he thought for the first time in a long while that maybe the best things in life came not when you went looking for them, but when you simply showed up for someone who needed you. "Then I'll call you Godfather Silas forever," Clara declared, hugging his waist. "Even when I'm big, even when I'm old." The courtroom was a modest affair, a single room with floorboards that creaked like tired bones, and a judge who wore his reading spectacles too low. Spring had softened into early summer by the time Silas Merriweather rode out to the county courthouse. The road was dry, the dust high, and the morning sun beat down with that particular weight that came just before the season turned truly harsh. The Stonecrofts had sent a note a week prior. Penned in Lillian's neat script and sealed with wax, the paperwork was ready. The judge had agreed to officiate it himself, and they wanted Silas there to make it official. He arrived early, as he always did, hitching Rosie to a fence rail just outside the porch, where honeysuckle curled along the posts like it had grown there on purpose. From inside, he could already hear Clara's laughter, a clear, bell-like sound that still caught him off guard every time he heard it. It was different from how she'd sounded at the orphanage. Freer. Whole. The courthouse itself had once been a schoolhouse, converted hastily when the territory needed laws faster than it needed arithmetic. The floorboards carried the weight of decades, and the pews, now courtroom benches, were lined with scuff marks and initials carved by restless hands. Silas stepped through the open door and removed his hat, scanning the room. Clara was perched on the front bench, legs swinging, her Sunday dress pressed and her hair tied in 2 crisp braids. She turned the moment she saw him, and he didn't need to wave her grin. Said it all. "Papa Silas," she whispered, bouncing up and down as he approached. "Afternoon, sweetheart," he said, lowering himself beside her. "You look like you're about to graduate the whole territory." "I brushed my hair 3 times, she said. "Mama Lillian said this is a real occasion. Not pretend." "Not pretend," he echoed, the words thick in his throat. Lillian and Bartholomew sat nearby, both dressed with a quiet dignity that didn't call attention to itself. Judge Elbridge Morrison, a barrel-chested man with a voice like gravel and a heart softer than most, cleared his throat and pushed his spectacles up his nose. "Well now," he said, pulling a folded paper from a leather folio. "Let's make this honest and proper." The room quieted. Even Clara sat still. "Silas Merriweather, The judge began, his tone formal but not cold. Do you, under the authority granted to this bench by the Arizona Territorial Council, agree to accept guardianship as godfather to Clara May Dillard Stonecroft, with all the rights, obligations, and care that such a bond carries under the law and by the eyes of God? Silas stood, his shoulders straight, his voice unwavering. I do. Judge Morrison nodded once. And do you agree to offer counsel, comfort, and protection for as long as the Lord allows you breath? I do, Silas said again. The judge turned to Clara. And do you, Clara May, accept Silas Merriweather as your godfather, to honor and trust him as kin, and to know he stands as family by law and love? Clara's voice was quiet, but strong. I do. There was a beat of silence, and then Judge Morrison tapped his gavel against the side of the table once more, a gesture, then a command. Then, by the authority vested in this humble room, it's done, he said, smiling. Congratulations to you both. There was no applause, just a long, quiet moment where Clara turned and threw her arms around Silas's waist with the kind of hug that held more meaning than words could stretch to hold. Outside, the sun had tilted westward, and the long shadows from the courthouse eaves reached out over the red dirt like fingers looking for home. Later that afternoon, the Stonecrofts hosted a simple supper back at the ranch. The table was laid beneath the cottonwoods, and the food was humble roasted chicken, sweet corn, cold potato salad. But the air was full of warmth, and Clara had a glow about her that made Silas feel like someone had built a hearth inside his chest. After the meal, Clara tugged at his sleeve and brought him toward the barn where Buttercup stood waiting, already saddled and patient as ever. I want to ride again, Clara said. Will you watch? Wouldn't miss it for the world. She climbed into the saddle with the confidence of someone who had worked for every inch of their strength. Her back was straight, her heels firm, and Buttercup responded to her touch with perfect trust. She rode a slow loop around the yard, the mare's hooves making soft thuds in the dust. The sun dipped low behind her, casting a long golden glow that made her hair shimmer like the wheat fields Silas remembered from childhood. Lillian and Bartholomew stood nearby, arms around each other. William raised a hand to shade his eyes as he watched. She's grown stronger, Lillian said quietly. She's found herself. Silas answered. You helped her do that. Lillian turned toward him, her expression soft. You helped her believe she was worth the finding. When Clara finished, she slid down from the saddle and ran toward Silas, cheeks flushed and breathing fast. I did good, didn't I? You did better than good, he said. You were brave. They sat on the porch afterward, drinking lemonade while the air cooled and the first stars blinked into being above the ridgeline. Clara had curled up beside him, her head resting against his side, and for a long time, no one spoke. It wasn't the kind of silence that needed to be broken. It was the kind that made a man feel safe. Then, just as the lanterns were being lit and the night began its slow claim over the land, Lillian sat forward, clearing her throat. There's something else we wanted to ask, she said. Silas turned to her, curious. If something ever happened to William and me, she began carefully, we'd want Clara to stay with family. And now, she's got you. We've already made that official, Silas said. We know, William added, stepping forward. But we want you to be more than a name on a piece of paper. Lillian nodded. We'd like to amend the documents further to make it clear that in our absence, you'd have full guardianship, that she'd be yours, not just in spirit, but in every way. Silas looked down at Clara, who was watching him with wide eyes. "What do you think, sweetheart?" he asked. Her voice was soft, but sure. "That would mean you'd be my family forever, wouldn't it? Not just pretend." "That's exactly what it would mean." She grinned. "Sunlight and starlight all mixed together." "Then yes," she said, "I want that." They sat for a long time after the stars came out in full, the warm light of the lanterns flickering against the beams of the porch. Somewhere in the barn. Buttercup let out a low whinny, and from the kitchen came the soft clatter of dishes being stacked. Clara rested her head back on his shoulder. "I love you, Godfather Silas. I love you too, Clara May," he whispered. "Always and forever." "That would mean you'd be my family forever, wouldn't it? Not just pretend, that's exactly what it would mean." And so the wind settles again across the empty roads of Dry Creek Hollow, brushing soft against the chapel door and weaving through the cracked pickets of the old fence that once leaned too far east, carrying with it the scent of sun-bleached wood, sage, and the memory of laughter that used to echo down the orphanage steps. Somewhere out on the edge of the pasture, a horse nickers low, hooves shifting in the dry soil, like it knows what's been left behind and what's finally found its place. Buttercup's stall is warm and sweet with hay, and the sound of her breathing is steady as a lullaby, while overhead, the rafters still creak with stories not yet told, but waiting. If you sit quiet long enough in the dusk, you'll hear it the clink of spurs across a porch, the low voice of a man with dust in his blood and a promise heavy in his chest, the sharp tearing of a wax seal on a letter written in a child's proud, crooked hand. There are handprints on the old porch rail, faded now, but not gone. There's a dishcloth left folded in the window, an embroidered C still peeking from the corner, and in the drawer of a kitchen that still smells faintly of lemon oil and cornbread. There lies a single folded note, addressed to a man who didn't think himself a father, but turned out to be one anyway. Maybe justice came late in this story, but it came with quiet feet and kind hands. Maybe love didn't burst through the gates it crept in, shy and barefoot, and waited to be seen. Maybe the child wasn't saved by the town, but by the forgotten man the town never bothered to understand. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones nobody names. Sometimes the truest stories aren't shouted, but whispered between fence posts and stitched into quilts and carried in the pocket of an old coat. The truth is, honor may be buried under shame and time and silence, but it doesn't rot, it waits. Forgiveness doesn't always come with fanfare, but with a soft knock at dusk and the smell of lavender soap on small hands. Clara May will grow, and when she does, she'll remember how one day changed the shape of her whole life, not because of fireworks or grand speeches, but because one man stayed when no one else had to. In that courtroom, beneath the faded seal of Arizona territory, a promise was made, not in ink, but in heart. And perhaps the most important verdict wasn't on paper, but in the way she looked up at him and called him hers. The old town may not recall every name carved into its benches, but the earth remembers footsteps, and the sky remembers songs hummed between breaths. And somewhere, in the gentle hush between nightfall and memory, there rides a man with gray in his beard and peace in his bones, who once carried the weight of regret and now carries the soft pull of belonging. Let this be the truth you carry home with you. Justice does not need applause, only witness. Love does not need permission, only a moment of courage, and every forgotten child, every silent man, every weary widow, each carries a story waiting not to be told, but to be claimed, just as one little girl claimed a name, and one quiet man found he'd been one all along. So if you're hearing this under the crackle of old air and lamplight, if your hands are weathered, and your heart remembers when good things were harder to come by, then maybe you understand. Maybe, like me, you still believe. If you do, if something in this tale stirred a memory or softened a corner of your soul, leave a sign. Let the wind know. Type 1 below and mark your saddle with it. Subscribe to the next ride with Western Story Chronicles. And let's keep telling these quiet stories about honor, about truth, about how love doesn't always roar, but it always returns. And when you close the book tonight, or tip your hat to the dusk, remember this: some stories end, not with thunder, but with the sound of a child's voice calling someone home.